Good morning. Welcome to AIA Florida Southwest's 2025 Coffee Talk. I'm Stephen Ruby, AIA, and I host the Coffee Talks. This morning we had the great fortune of talking with Joyce Owens. She's FAIA and RIBA, so she's international in her nature. She is the principal of Architecture Joyce Owens in Fort Myers, and she has the distinction of being the first woman to receive the AIA Florida Gold Medal, which is a distinct honor. It's the highest award that AIA Florida bestows on one of its members. Prior to that, in 2020, she received the AIA Florida Gold Medal of Honor for Design, which is also a very prestigious award. She's a proud Notre Dame graduate. And she had a practice in London, and she left her practice in London after 15 years there and relocated in Florida in 2004. Both her practice in the UK and here in Florida now, her firm has garnered great attention, both internationally and locally, and has been publicized for numerous award-winning buildings and designs, which are both environmentally and regionally sensitive, as well as culturally appropriate to their place in Southwest Florida. Joyce has become known as a coastal architect, or the coastal architect, and is a huge advocate of the climate-sensitive architectural style called tropical modern, which incorporates resilience as well as passive and active sustainability principles into her designs. Joyce was elected to the prestigious College of Fellows, which is the national level at American Institute of Architects, which is the highest membership honor that can be bestowed on an AIA member nationally. That was for her work in architecture and her contributions to society. Welcome, Joyce.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure to sit and talk with you over coffee or other types of beverages.
Which we do well.
Which we have done before, too. I mentioned that you had a practice in UK and in the US, okay? I'm interested what the differences that you saw between these two practices and the way your clients and the public saw your work and architecture in general.
So yes, I did have the good fortune of being an architect in two countries. And I would have to say that being an architect in London is a very different opportunity because the public perceive you differently. So you're not perceived as a necessity, you're perceived as a professional that has something to offer them on every level. And so it was a real privilege to be called an architect because I am licensed in Britain as well, and I felt when people spoke to me and asked me questions and then they got my answer, I felt that they believed me and they wanted to learn more, they wanted to hear what I had to say. Interestingly, if I said something to them, they typically implemented it. They didn't question me or of course there was always discussion, but I never felt like I was being shopped or undermined or all these words kind of that we use. And so I was too young when I went to know that difference in America because I didn't have my own practice yet and I hadn't practiced enough. But I found one of the best things was getting paid as well. We almost always got paid without question. Once they hired us and employed us, we just got paid. And we were expected to do our job and they expected us to invoice them and then we got paid.
What a unique concept.
I know, it was wonderful. And so I just feel it's just a different, I think architects have a different place here in society, and I feel like that has a lot to do with which has always been my personal goal, is educating the public about architects and architecture, because I don't feel they have the same understanding of who architects are and what we do in America. Whereas there, maybe it's an older culture, it's an older, architects have been more part of the public scene, and people are more aware of what they do. And they love history, and they love their buildings anyway, so yeah.
Well, did you find that architects tend to, I'm using this word in quotes, promote themselves more? Because sometimes we here in the United States feel, it's inappropriate or it's unethical, or we have to be humble and we can't talk about our work and promote ourselves. Did you find, was there a difference in that?
No, yes, I did find that there was a difference in that. I don't think they felt that way about it. I don't think they did it so much because I feel that they were sought out. Architects were sought for what they had to say, so they were often referred to and often included in press releases and so on. As I go back to what I said about it became my sort of life's goal to educate the public about the value of architects and architecture. I find here we as architects don't even, we value ourselves, but we forget to tell people why we are valuable. And I like to talk a lot about storytelling, and I think it's very much a skill set that all architects must learn once they become an architect, so that they tell the story of who they are and what they need to do to educate the public about who they are and what they're doing, and they can't be afraid of it. They have to do it. And people, like you said, sometimes they're afraid because they feel like they're talking about themselves. And I always try to say, don't feel like you're talking about yourself, then focus on the building you've created and why it's a better building, because it was created by an architect. You don't have to make it personal, but you have to learn how to tell your story, whether that's through your own writing, or through social media, through the press. I have many wonderful relationships with journalists. I don't know why I attract them, but I do. And so it's really nice.
You write so well.
I don't know about that, but I have written about architecture.
I know you've written about architecture.
Yeah, and so I try to keep up those relationships, and I know the rules. They're on a deadline. When they call you, they need you. You have to drop everything. It's like when you're doing a job site, right? They need you there more than you need to get your design work done. They need you in that moment because they're just like us. They're going to procrastinate, and all of a sudden they're on a deadline. So they need an answer now. And if you're the architect that's there to answer questions for them or provide the information they're looking for, they'll come to you. So I have a whole series of people that know that I'm always available to help them answer questions, whether it's my project or any other project in the community. So
interesting. I'm sure there's some best practices that you learned in the UK. Were they transferable to your practice here in the U.S.? And if so, what was transferable?
Interestingly, the one I remember or feel the most about that is waterproofing, which is the weirdest thing to say.
It's damp in London.
It's so damp in London, and they're so good at waterproofing there. They so understand keeping water out and keeping water from rising damp. And so their detailing is tried and true for centuries. I mean, that's how they have to live because, I mean, it's very damp there all the time, and if it wasn't done right in the first place, it's going to be damp for the next 500 years in that building because they build things to last. So they try really hard to do all of their buildings now very carefully detailed. And I didn't think that was as important as it is until I came to Southwest Florida, because we're such a wet climate here and we have that same humidity that they have there. And so that transfer of moisture is always occurring in our buildings. And so it was a really good lesson to learn, which is kind of an odd thing because I want to say something fantastic about the design and this and that. And of all things, it's waterproofing. So,
well, that's an important aspect.
Well, as I say to my young people, my young architects in my office, I always quiz them when they come to work for me. They're usually there for about a week. And I say, so what's the most important thing we have to do as an architect? and they start to tell me about design, and they start to tell me about this or that or meeting codes or whatever, I say, good, all of those things are important, but the most important thing you have to do is keep the water out. And they just look at me like I've just said something completely out of the blue, and they're like, no. And I'm like, yeah, that's the most important thing we have to do as an architect.
We're building a show. That
Yep.
show needs to house people,
Right.
keep them dry, keep them safe, keep them warm when it's cold, and enlighten them.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
a good portion of your practice recently has been along the coast in high hazard areas, and I know when you first started your practice, everything I'm doing is on Sanibel and Captiva. But all of your buildings, all of your architecture withstood the brunt of Hurricane Ian, which was one of the most ruthless hurricanes we've had in decades. Why do you think that's so? Why did your buildings hold up when things are... There's a very famous photograph of one of your houses, and everything within eyesight of yours is gone. I don't know where it went, but you're standing in the middle of rubble. Why is that so?
Yeah, I think I was very fortunate. When I came back from England, I went and worked for one of the bigger companies in town, and it was really fun. I got to do, I was like their senior designer, and so I was designing buildings and having a good old time. And then Hurricane Charlie came through, and it was just a devastating hurricane, small but mighty. And it took the whole building construction community to help put things back together in Punta Gorda and Captiva and all of that. And one of my jobs was to drop everything I was doing and to go out to Captiva and to do assessments of the buildings that were there. And then to do, I think we had to do 71 or 73 permits. And they thought they were going to get them done in like 2 weeks, okay, which it didn't take. It took like 3.5 months, but we did it. And that was my job, is to get all these permits out so they could start restoring these buildings up at South Seas Plantation. And that experience, while I was very reluctant to do that that isn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to do my nice job where I was doing all the pretty churches and schools and all these nice buildings.
You didn't want to go slogging through the mud, right?
I did not want to be doing that, and it was hot and it was humid, and I mean it was a lot. And but sure enough, that education was invaluable to how do buildings withstand our climate, not just hurricanes, but how do they stand up in our climate. So going forward then, once I started my own business again in Southwest Florida, I was very conscious of all of these things I had learned about materials, what worked, what didn't work, how did the building stand up, how vinyl siding was a mistake in any situation, whether it was an expensive building or a cheap building, or if you were going to re-side something that had been, sided already. Under every circumstance, it is not for our climate. And I just learned, this about that product and this about that, and it was good for me to have that experience then when I started my own company, so that I could bring all that expertise in. Meanwhile, we started doing homes right on the coast, and that required a different look at how we had been building in the past, because in the past we had been using pilings to build houses on the beach, or commercial buildings on the beach. Everything was pilings, and those pilings, whether they were wood or whether they were concrete, were driven into the ground, and then they came out of the ground like this, and then you put your building on top to get above flood. And so it turns out, fortunately for me, I didn't do any of my buildings like that. I went down a much more kind of structurally secure manner of putting the pilings below grade and using grade beams to tie all of those pilings together with grade beams, and then building up from there with shear walls and using concrete for everything that we built. And that method was hugely successful in the storm, because my houses were the only ones on the beach designed that way. And so these shear walls that we created are perpendicular to the beach. So when the storm came and the water surged onto the beach, the water went right through and under the buildings, just like it was supposed to do. And there was zero structural damage. There was a lot of damage to the beach, a lot of surge, where these foundations or grade beams were exposed. But the pilings held strong. It's all concrete. It can't go anywhere because those pilings are driven deep into the earth, and they serve as sort of, they serve like tree roots. They're in the ground and they're holding those buildings tight. And so it worked out really well. So we had completed 2 houses on the beach designed like that, and we had 4 under construction, and not one of them suffered any structural damage because of that.
Was that your design concept, or did you work with an structural engineer to kind of work it?
We worked with a structural engineer, and from the beginning he suggested this to us. He explained it to me and I understood it, and I went and I educated my clients by saying, this method is typically used for like big condos, so it's going to cost you more money, but you're on the coast, and so it would be prudent to think about this. And so I went through and I would draw diagrams and I would explain to them what we were doing, and they all of them said, yes, I want to put the extra money in to make my home strong. And so it worked.
Okay, Joyce, so the years you've been developing these concepts and making buildings stronger, and the lessons that you've learned both in UK and here, where do you see the future of planning and design and technology and construction in this vulnerable space that we live in?
Well, I think we all have to learn the lessons from each other about what's happening out there and try to correct the mistakes that we've done in the past. Like when I said I went out to South Seas after Hurricane Charlie, and I saw all of the decay and the rot that happened out there. We collectively in the community that was out there learned what not to do, because those buildings were designed by builders that came from the Midwest, and they built it just like they built in the Midwest. We can't. Our climate is too harsh and has too much humidity to build in the same way. So we learned from that lesson. So, and then we started building more, I learned a lot. And so I worked with my builders who learned those lessons to try to build better for the future. And then after Hurricane Charlie, we did the same thing. We got together afterwards and we all swapped war stories. We literally sat down together, swapped war stories, sent emails to each other. What did you see? Like, what went wrong? What worked for you? Like, which things failed and how do you think we could do it better? And so we literally spent the next 6 months after the hurricane trying to understand all the things that we had seen and share them with each other. And I would call, going forward, I would call the carpenter and say, what did you find? What are the 2 things that you saw out there that made you, like, what would you do differently in this storm? And a great example was, you won't believe this, but houses with gutters, the roof was more resilient. And the reason it's more resilient, if you just put a flashing on, even this is like, I'm talking hip roofs even, okay? But if you come down and you put a flashing at the bottom of the hip roof, they aren't required to fix them in the same way. Then if you put the gutter in along the bottom like this, you have to nail that gutter or fix that gutter in underneath the flashing, and that keeps the wind from coming up underneath. I never would have recognized that or thought about that as being a condition of how to make a roof stronger, okay, by putting a gutter in, because I always learned that we don't use gutters down here that much unless you're over someone's like door or where they're going to work, because we have such torrential rains here that you don't the gutters fail.
Or overshoots the gutter.
It just doesn't work.
Overshoots it.
And so they're not very good unless they're for, like on the beach they're good because you get condensation on metal roofs in the morning, and so it picks up the drip. But in a torrential rain, they don't do anything. So we've sort of stopped putting gutters on our buildings, except for where you don't want them to drop over the front door in the morning and create a problem on the, mold or puddling on the driveways or whatever. And so it was I've changed my tune now. Now I'm trying to, be very conscious of that detail, so that people don't lose their roofs.
And now
next
we're going
time.
to so many flat roofs on contemporary houses. That's a whole other issue about securing the roof so it doesn't peel off at the parapets and the copings around the building. So,
Yeah.
so it sounds like what you're saying is that the way in the future to get things much more sustainable and much more hardened is through communication.
Thank you. Absolutely.
So and that's kind of one of your major wheelhouses, is to communicate what we do, why we do it, and why it's important.
Yeah.
So,
and I tried to make myself very available after the storm for community events. And so even if someone doesn't know anything about building, I put together a presentation that was very clear, it was very graphic to present to the community, because, like the city of Sanibel did a rebuilding, seminar, and they brought in both, I invited one of my favorite builders in to be with me, and we sat and we talked about all the things that I'm kind of talking to you about here, but I had all the graphics to go along with it, so that we could say to our community, impact windows, spend the money, do it right, do hurricane windows and doors, because they're far better than any kind of shutter you can put on the outside of the building, because those shutters will fail. They'll still fail, right? And so don't even bother with those. Don't pretend anymore. Like, do them right. Get your windows and doors attached to the building properly, and make sure you have the appropriate, glass in there so that they work. So it was good. It was a good time after the storm to be sharing all of these things.
and I've seen on social media and in the flesh some of your graphics that you use, and the neat thing about them is that you bring them down to the level that the average person can look at it and understand it. It's not tech talk, it's not architect talk, and I think that's key. Sometimes we as architects use language that the public doesn't quite understand. We use diagrams and statistics that they don't understand, and then that gives us that whole image of being the elitists. What you do is, by bringing it down to the human level, to the average person level, is so important.
That's a very, thank you for appreciating that, because when I wrote for the news press a while back, however, 15 years ago, so I wrote for the news press for 4 years, and I did a monthly column, and the news press was reluctant to let me do it, because they said the problem with having professionals write columns is they speak in their own professional speak, and it becomes impossible for the average person to read it. And so my editor was very good, and she told me the first time I wrote anything, you have to write for someone, you have to think of 6th grade. It's not that the audience was all 6th grade readers, but you have to think of it in that mindset, because that will keep your vocabulary clear, and you won't be using, archi-speak or whatever we want to call it, that vocabulary that we use to talk to each other.
Use window, not fenestration.
Right. You never use the word fenestration. So, yeah. And so I think that's where I learned that very early, to do that. And I hope, I suppose I have was successful in doing that with the graphics as well. And so I try to make sure, when I'm in my office and we're talking to journalists, or we're talking to clients or contractors, I'm always trying to get my staff to understand, like, everything you're saying must be very clear how you're going to say that to them. So don't think you can say this airy-fairy idea, because they're not going to get it. So.
But that's interesting. At least means something else that I wanted to ask you, because you've touched on it several times already. You're a huge proponent of exposing the public to the value of architecture and what the architect does. What do you think the role of all of us in the profession should be to promote that value position, and how would you suggest they go about it in their everyday practice and their daily lives?
Mm-hmm. I think, do not underestimate the ability to communicate is so important, and I feel that we shouldn't be afraid to reach out to the public, whether it's through social media or through the press. We can't be afraid to even make that call and say, I have a story for you. What do you think of this? To pitch our own work or pitch something that we're seeing in the community. If it's not our project, pitch something you do know about. We're such, like, what we don't realize as architects is each one of us has a skill and an expertise in something. I say coastal architecture now. I didn't know that's what I was doing. I didn't know it until after the storm that that's what happened, right? It was just a byproduct of the success that our buildings, were, came out so well after the storm. But that, I was always just trying to promote, good design work, taking care of my clients, and I always use that term tropical modern for my designs. I feel it's very important, but I feel like my tropical modern definition is expanded. So you need to find what your story is as an architect and then share it with whoever, whether it's a contractor, whether it's a product manufacturer, whether it's the press, whoever it is. But we each have our stories, and we all have to be able to learn how to communicate. So the good news now is I've learned, even if you don't know how to write, there's AI for that. And so it can be a very useful tool for architects who have very poor writing skills. But we have the expertise and the understanding. So what I find with AI, I don't use it that often, but I will consult it sometimes when I'm struggling. And what I realize is AI is nothing without you, without your ideas behind the idea. Like, it can't say anything without the input that you're giving it. And so if you focus on your area of expertise and let's say you put in 3 sentences and you tell it what you're trying to get across, and you say, oh, I'm not comfortable with how I said that, whatever, you stick it in AI, it'll come out the other end, and it still might not be right. But it's easier for you to change it to get it where you want. And then you can present that to anybody because it'll be said in plain English, and because AI does not know architecture speak either, which is awesome. And so it's a really good way to be able to verbally communicate. But again, like you've noticed, we communicate through drawings, and it's just being out there and being able to say these things to people. And as well as any architect that knows me, that's what I've been doing for decades, since I met you. You know that's been what I've been trying to say and try to do.
Well, you lead me into another question I had. So many of our professionals are saying, oh, well, AI is the future. What's the impact? Is it a threat, or is it an opportunity? You just mentioned using AI primarily for writing, but there's so many other aspects of AI that are forming for code research and design and forming things, and you just see them on on Instagram and LinkedIn all the time. All these images popping up and software that will generate them for you. What do you think the future is for AI, and is it an opportunity, or is it a threat? Or is it both?
I think it's both. I think it's both. I think it's an opportunity for things that are difficult for architects or bog us down in some ways. Like, I think learning to use AI for things like specifications, it's a great tool for that. I think once AI and we as architects figure out that symbiotic relationship, our specification writing is going to be so much easier and so much simpler, understanding products and getting it to put it all together in a format that's readable and legible. It'll help us become less liable for the things we say, because I think it'll be more clear how it's written. I think code research is definitely somewhere where AI could be helpful to us. It doesn't take away our own responsibility for checking it. Okay, we still have to check it, but the bulk of the work can be done that way. As far as using it for design, I'm still a bit suspicious, because every time I see something where someone asks AI to design something, it's nonsense. It's just nonsense. And maybe it'll get better over time, but in the same way, I feel that AI is a useful tool for writing, only because I put my own expertise into it to come out of the other end with something that makes sense and it's good. I don't think AI can be used for design. until the input that goes into it is excellent and it knows how to interpret it. And I don't think we're anywhere near there yet.
I was in IT, deep in IT, and he said, Dad, this goes all the way back. He said, garbage in, garbage out.
Thank you.
He said,
there you go.
So you're still the architect who's putting in the criteria and the images. You have to know how to populate it so you get the results you're looking for.
Yeah, and I don't think we're there. I don't think we're still a long way off on doing that.
Well, think about when we first had a word processor.
Yeah.
How cumbersome it was and how inaccurate it was at times. So, 10 years from now, who knows what it's going to be.
And I hope we get to use it for our benefit, and I hope it only makes us stronger, but I think it'll be up to us to make sure we don't lose the handle on AI and let it go, into someone's hands that doesn't know how to do it. I hope there's a way that we can still show the world that AI is good, but it's only good as the person that's feeding it in.
Yeah, and I see the downside. I'm seeing it as, you're right, it gets into the hands of someone who doesn't appreciate architecture. It's time expedient, and if I can crank out an office building by letting AI generate it for me, I don't need an architect, I don't need an engineer, and now I can market. It could be a builder, could be a developer, could be anybody who has no kind of understanding about the depth of what we do. So I think I see that being the danger, that they're going to use it as an alternative for us and create things that are less than adequate.
Yes, and I hope in the nicest possible way those buildings fail. Not in a health, safety, welfare sense, but I hope they fail for the developers.
Rent them.
Yeah, they can't rent them, or they leak, or they do this, or they do that. I hope that, and then people will realize the value that we bring to it. Because, how can AI understand things like, bringing in daylight at a certain time of day to make sure that, residents are comfortable? I should say keep out the daylight sometimes in Southwest Florida, because it isn't always about bringing daylight in here. Oftentimes it's about keeping that hot sun out of your buildings.
Why are we looking west at that glare on
with
the
no
Gulf?
protection?
With no protection, exactly.
So.
I had a conversation with a principal of an architectural firm 7 months ago. We had a great discussion about marketing, and we mentioned before that we have we're quite often reluctant to talk about ourselves, talk about profession, talk about our product. And we had this great discussion, and what came up was you mentioned part of it. You got to tell your story. Okay. The other thing they talked about is branding and finding your niche. And I think you've just watching your social media presence and your images evolve over the past 4 or 5 years. You have branded yourself. You have a niche, and you market in a non-arrogant way. How'd you do that?
I think it was out of necessity more than anything else, because I didn't grow up in Southwest Florida. I had come here when I was young. I was very familiar with it. I got my license in Florida, and then I went to Europe. And then, so I'd only lived in Florida apart from my longer vacations sometimes or whatever on the islands, but I never lived here apart from those 2 years getting my license. So I went directly to England after that. And when I came back, while I was very familiar with where I was and very comfortable with where I was, nobody knew who I was or what I did. I was a foreigner here to them. And so I realized when I started my own company a few years after I got back, nobody knew who I was, what I did, that I was in England. Nobody cared. It didn't matter. And the one thing I found was I thought when I could come back to Fort Myers, it was a small town. I'll do fine in a small town. I've worked in London. I had a successful practice in London. You know, I had amazing clients there, and we did really well. And I thought, oh, if I can do it in London, certainly I can do it in a small town. But what I didn't understand is small towns are far more difficult than working in a big cosmopolitan city.
Absolutely.
And so I struggled for a long time to get people to know who I was, to find the work. And I thought in my own, like, I call it my own ivory tower of a world in my head, that I was going to be doing like churches and museums and pretty buildings. And those buildings don't really exist down here, nor do the budgets exist for them. But also, I didn't have any roots in this community. I didn't know the good old boys in this town. They're not going to give me work. Why would they give me work when they've got, 15, 20 other architects that come from here that have been working here for 20, 30, 40 years. They're established in this place. They're not going to give me work. So I found that I went to Sanibel because I was very familiar with Sanibel, because my parents and my family had lived out there, so I knew people. And so I found my way out there, and I created my own niche, which is, I only realized this after it happened. I didn't know that's what I was doing. I was just trying to survive at the time. And so little by little, I did get to know people, and I did get involved in the community, and I did start to do things, and people started to pay attention. And all of a sudden I realized I filled a void that no one even knew existed. And so it gave me this opportunity to do something that, instead of doing crappy builder houses out there with, residential designers who are fine people, okay, but they shouldn't be designing like coastal homes because they're too complex and they don't have the experience in the structures that we have and understanding all of the climate. They're just drawing nice houses with pretty pictures, and they work independently of the engineers, who then they don't, because the engineer, we have to have engineers to make our residences stand up. But nobody's coordinating all of that. And so all of a sudden I was there to do all of that. And I love doing all of the design work, including the interiors as well. And so I just kept right on going, and people were open to it, and so they let me do it. And all of a sudden they didn't have to hire an interior designer as well. So we opened an interior design department so that we could finish the job by doing the furniture as well. So I literally evolved into that part of my practice, the residential side. I think once the success of those buildings after the storm raised so much attention, we had been doing smaller commercial work anyway, but not bigger projects. I think we caught the attention of the good old boys, and all of a sudden, guess what? I'm getting work in, Fort Myers with the good old boys now. I feel very honored that I'm getting to do commercial works that are buildings of consequence within the community, and it's really nice for me that now I have that. But I find that in my own way, I had to take this kind of very circuitous path to get where I am today, I suppose.
I have to smile because it's probably 6 or 7 years ago, and I think we were sitting in my office probably over a drink, and you were lamenting about the fact, all I get to do is work in Sanibel. You guys are in Naples. I would love to do something down here. This is, I'm doing these houses in Sanibel. And I kept saying, yeah, but nobody else is doing them.
Yeah, and you were right, because
you have taken something that you could have walked away from. You could have said, I can't do this anymore, and you've turned it into your career.
I have, and I at the time I was thinking, I want to do more than residences. But now I've realized the complexity of the buildings that we're doing is far more difficult than the commercial projects that exist in Southwest Florida. That's a broad statement. Of course, there are some very complicated buildings, but most of the work that architects get down here, they're very straightforward buildings, right? Whether they're a strip mall or a big building, like a metal building, or we're not doing great buildings down in Southwest Florida. We don't have that opportunity necessarily. So the architects have to make the best of what we have and do good out of what we have. When I've received the question, like, when you start working on a building, are you like starting from the site plan? This is like a person that has, let's say, 8 years experience. Are you like starting with the ground and you're working up into a building and you're thinking about the sun and the rain and the wind? And I'm like, well, what else would I do? And they're like, well, I always get a building and I'm fitting it out. Like they're doing just like hospital fit outs or something, you know? So they've never had that expertise. No, that experience of being able to design something from the ground up, to be able to think about that. And they find it fascinating, you know? It's like, no, that's what we do. That's what we've been trained to do as architects.
Great. You should be proud of your firm, because I think you've built a great culture there. And it might somewhat unique to Southwest Florida, because I don't think majority of the firms are structured that way. Maybe you and I have structured our firms. And I just see it by people who come through my office from other firms, and you know, some of the stories.
Horrible stories.
Which are terrible for young professionals, giving them, if you really want to encourage somebody to stay in the profession and grow, it's horror. It is, those horror stories are not pleasant to hear.
No, they're not, for sure.
Well, Joyce, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. It's always wonderful sitting and talking with you.
Thank you as
and I'm
well.
sure we'll do it again.
Yeah, next time over a martini, I hope.
We could do that. It's a little early in the morning, but we can do that.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much, Joyce.